Hello and welcome to the Backroads. It's a long-awaited return to Project MR2, and you might have seen way back in June, I think in 2021, I bought this 3S GTE for the MR2. And finally we're getting around to refreshing it, not rebuilding. Well, maybe it needs a rebuild, we'll discover that. But today we have the lovely MR2 Sensei here to assist, because I don't know what I'm doing. We've got all new gaskets and that to go in this, new oil pump, new water pump, and we're going to do some tests on it to see if it's ruined or not, if I've made a horrible purchase, but I bought it cheap enough where it's probably fine. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Right, so what we're doing to the engine is a light refresh. We're doing all new gaskets and seals, water pump, oil pump, but I'm not particularly clued up on how we're going to do that, which is why I called in Brad, who is the MR2 Sensei, and he is also the reason why I bought this, so it's his fault and he has to help me through it. So he can help me understand what steps we have to take, because I've never done this before. I've installed an exhaust on my car, a couple of oil changes, and now this. So, yeah, help.
Well, as we can't do a compression test because we've got no gearbox on, no starter motor, we're going to do a leak down test using an air compressor. That's going to give us a rough idea of the health of the engine to start with. Then we're going to strip the engine down to a long block, cam belt off, oil pump off, water pump off. We're going to take the head off, we're going to replace the head gasket with a multi-layer steel gasket, which is what the later MR2s had, to allow a bit more boost to be run through them without popping the gaskets out. And other than that, yeah, we'll give it a full check over, have a look at the bearings, see if we've got any issues along the way, and fingers crossed, by the end of the day, have a refreshed engine.
I've got... I'm getting nervous.
Draining out what's left of all of the old, suspiciously dark oil is the first trip at hand when starting work on this old turbo motor, so that we aren't working in a site marked as a future prospect for the US military. Next, we're removing the plastic trim which covers the cam gears and the timing bell, and finally removing the rocker cover to give us a clear view and understanding of what condition our head, valves and cams are in ahead of our leak down test.
Right, so we've got the cam, God, is it a cam or rocker cover?
Rocker cover.
I never know which one it is. And now there's an oily mess here, but I think it's a good oily mess, but I'm not sure. I can see there's a lot of build up, to be fair, like around here and on the inside of the head as well, I suppose. Brad can tell us the damage and what is there and what isn't.
It looks as if this car has missed a few oil changes over the last few years. However, feeling of the cam lobes, nothing seems worn or damaged. Just maybe a few extra miles on the oil than what it should have done. The turbo cars really need an oil change every 3,000 miles or so. However, the oil that's been used is probably a good quality, fully synthetic, so it's probably saved the cams at this point. But we'll get it flushed out and cleaned up, and it should be good as new.
With unexpected but still decent results for the condition of our head, cams and valves, it's on to tackling our timing on the 3S GTE and how to spot if the engine is timed up. As you're about to see, we can do this with a number of markings on the side of the engine.
So, a super quick explanation with timing up a 3S GTE. It scares the life out of everyone, and it's actually so simple. So you have two timing marks on top of your cam pulleys, or as such. Now they line up with a crease in the steel on the back plate. This one's been marked with a paint mark. Both pulleys should be 12 o'clock straight up. And you'll also have your timing mark on your cover, which should be the mark on the pulley goes to the 0 degree point on the cover. There's also a timing mark behind on the oil pump, which we'll look at later as we change the cam belt. But the simplest way of timing up a 3S GTE is the two dots to the top cover and your auxiliary belt pulley to the 0 degree mark on the cover.
Right, now we're at top dead center. We're going to start doing our leak down test, which will begin with taking the spark plug out of cylinder 1, and then we'll do our leak down test on that to see the condition of the engine. It should give us an idea on the head gasket and piston rings maybe. And then as we go through that, we'll check each cylinder and see how they are, and then that will give us an idea of how the engine is doing, if it's doing horribly, if it's doing bad. We're hoping for in the yellow on the leak down test at least. Get going on that and hopefully it's good news.
The leak down test gives us an idea of how well a cylinder is sealing by running compressed air through the spark plug hole and bringing a reading back to our gauges of the percentage of leakage in the cylinder. The benefit of doing a leak down test over a compression test is with some diagnostic we can discover where the problems are if they're found, such as letting down the dipstick or exhaust and intake valve size, and it doesn't require the engine to be turning over at a decent RPM to do, unlike a compression test.
So, good news on the leak down test. We've got 3 out of 4 looking pretty good. We've got 1 in the moderate, which seems to be on the exhaust valve, but Brad can explain a bit more about that. But all seems pretty good considering the fact that this engine's probably been sat for at least 2-3 years.
Cylinders 1, 3 and 4 are all in the good on the leak down gauge, which is below 20% of leakage. Cylinder 2 does have some leakage. It's in the moderate, maybe around 30% leakage, which should be enough to start it, but it's actually leaking through the exhaust valve. So we can actually see into the valve slightly, and there is a bit of gumming around the valves, but as we're taking the head off, we'll take the valves off, give them a clean out, and we'll do another leak down test once the engine's built back up. But other than that, for an engine that's been sitting, we expect the piston rings to be closed up a little bit. We don't expect full compression, but there is very little leak down throughout the engine, so it's a healthy engine, ready to go.
With the good news that it's worth continuing with the work we want to do to this engine, it's now time to tackle removing the timing belt and pulleys, all starting with removing the crankshaft pulley. This will allow us to remove the bottom plastic cover from our timing, where we can now access the oil and water pump as well, which are 2 items we're replacing as part of the refresh.
Right, so now we've taken the cover off all of the timing, we have discovered something that would have been screwed if we'd done either a compression test or tried to run the car, is a small little bolt has snapped off from the water pump and was sat just right here within all the timing. So it's a good thing we've taken all that off, because otherwise that would have gone horribly wrong. And I've just been told these are interference engines, so it would go wrong. What we've got here is we have the idler pulley here, we have one here. This is our oil pump, which we're changing. We've got an OEM Toyota one to go here. We have a water pump here as well. We've got an OEM type 1 here to replace with as well. Hydraulic tensioner, which is on the Rev 1 and 2 3SGT engines. The Rev 3 onwards is a sprung tensioner. And we've got another idler pulley here. So we've got a few of these to replace. I've got a brand new one of the hydraulic tensioner, new water pump, new oil pump, and that's what we're going to try and do today. But we'll have to see, as you can also see, someone has replaced this bolt with a Phillips head, where they might have been concerned that it was going to rub on the timing belt. So we'll have to see how that goes, because it's not meant to be like that.
So far, I'm pleased with the condition of our bargain MR2 Turbo engine, and with the work that we're doing to the engine now, it'll hopefully keep it running for years to come.
Okay, so it turns out that our current timing bit on here is relatively new, other than the time the engine's been stored. However, as Jared mentioned, one of the nuts has been probably over torqued on the water pump and snapped off. So we'll have to try to remove that stud before we put anything back on. But our next step is to remove the timing belt assembly. We're going to leave the pulleys for the cams on. We'll remove the hydraulic tensioner, the idler pulleys, the water pump and the oil pump, as this is all being replaced as part of the refresh. And then we'll start to take the head off the engine and replace the head gasket with a multi-layer steel version.
From first changing out the exhaust of my MR2 to the very next step being buying an engine within a year of owning the car, dismantling a turbo motor, prepping it for a swap into my otherwise standard MR2, it's quite terrifying. But it's an exciting journey, and the amount of information and skills that I'm learning that will stick with me forever throughout my automotive journey are countless. It's a relatively obscene projects like this which lead you to meeting incredible people, learning incredible stories and creating incredible memories. And this day alone provided enough entertainment and education to justify any cost of both time and money that I've spent on this project so far. Do I have any idea what I'm doing yet? Of course not. But I think I'm going to figure it out thanks to the support around me, as well as you watching and following along with this project. The confidence that we're gaining from this project is again something that will stick with us throughout the rest of our lives, and hopefully this engine lasts just as long. Maybe. It is us working on it.
So we've finally got all the timing stuff off now. We've got the belt off, we've got the hydraulic tensioner, the pulleys, water pump is off, now oil pump. We've had to pull the sump off to get the oil pump off, which has revealed some suspicious stuff, which we'll show you in a second. Bit of a pain to get off because we didn't realise, obviously we had the pickup line from the sump into the pump there. So it was a bit awkward, but we've done it now. After we show you the sump, next steps is taking the head off. So we've got to take the head bolts out. There's 10 of those, which we have to do in a specific order, which I don't know off the top of my head currently, so we'll figure that out. And then, yeah, we can see what's gone wrong maybe, or what hasn't gone wrong. It looks all good so far, to be fair, though. And there's a few suspect bits, but it's all right.
So now we've removed the sump, we've found this mixture of oil and goop and all the nasty stuff. And this is why it's so important to change your oil regularly. This engine looks like it's had a recent refresh. There is a bit of petrol in the oil, which isn't unusual with a boosted engine. However, this is probably from lack of servicing. Like we noted in the head, there's a lot of sort of burnt oil and a lot of build up, and this may well have stuck around after a couple of oil changes. Fortunate enough to remove the sump now, so we can clean it all out and get it back to a new standard.
The biggest, physically at least, part of this engine work is to remove the head. Because I didn't fully strip down the engine prior, this means removing the distributor and the coolant tree from the engine so that we can pull the head off. After that, it's on to removing the stretch type bolts used on the head of these Toyota engines. Where possible, you should try to remove these parallel to each other to reduce the pressure load over the engine. After, this allows us to pull the head off and reveal the old school fibre gasket we're upgrading to a multi-layered steel type gasket, and all of the grime we need to clean up using a fine blade, including the pistons and removal of the old gasket.
Right, welcome back. It's now been probably a few hours since we last saw you. We've now taken the head off and taken the definitely slightly dodge fibre seal gasket off of it, the head gasket. And we've just been cleaning up the head and having a look over it. Piston heads, we can see a couple of them has a couple signs of pre-ignition detonation on them. Not too bad, or it's from the end of a spark plug hitting them. And there's also two no piston heads in here which don't match up with the rest of the set, but their OEM all seems well, and obviously on the leak down it all came back reasonably well. So we've just been cleaning up all the surfaces so they can mate back together. We put the MLS head gasket on, which is going to be an upgrade. The MLS multi-layer steel one is what Rev 3 onwards would use, which is a lot more reliable and handle more power, etc., than the kind of fibre steel ones with the graphite layer on them, which is what we've been spending a lot of boring times while we've not filmed it, just scraping it off to try and clean this all up, because obviously it's all a bit gunky from being sat for a while and then not being looked after with like the lack of oil change and stuff like that we've looked at before. But it's all looking pretty promising. So now I've been faffing around with the main seal, getting the gasket off that. Still got to get the rest of that off because it's been on there. It looks like it might have been on there since factory, to be honest, and no one's changed it. Probably because it's always hidden by the gearbox. And we've got the main seal done there at least, but the gasket itself is to be changed still. But both heads are looking pretty good. The head gasket will take up the slack on the from what we've seen on the straight edge. And it should run nicely once we finish it, but there's a lot more to do still.
After a painful hour or so of scraping away the head of the block and the head of the engine, we were able to install our upgraded MLS head gasket, which can be found in Rev 3 and onwards 3SGT engines, which will provide more reliability and better strength for any future power modifications to the engine over the fibre gasket we were using previously. We're putting assembly lube in all of the holes for our head bolts, as well as coating the new head bolts in assembly lube as well to reduce any friction whilst torquing them in to get an accurate reading. Similar to when we remove the head, you should torque them down parallel to each other to distribute the pressure evenly across the head to ensure a proper seal.
Right, so we just torqued up the head. We've run the head at 36 foot-pound, which is the factory standard torque that's used for the head bolts, plus 90 degrees. So once you hit 36 foot-pounds, you then pull your torque ratchet around an extra 90 degrees, and that's the factory setting. If you're using like an ARP head bolt, which is like a performance head bolt, they have their own specs. It's normally an awful lot higher, around 72 pounds, something around there. But whenever you're doing head bolts, you should bring them up in sort of 2 or 3 stages. So we've done 20 foot-pound, 30 foot-pound, and then up to 36 foot-pound across the board, plus our 90-degree stretch. They are stretch bolts. You shouldn't reuse the head bolts out of a 3SGT or a 3SGE engine. You should always replace them every time you have the head off. It can get expensive with the ARPs. They are worth the money, and they do say that you can reuse them 2 or 3 times. You have to check with the manufacturer. But other than that, this head's now down with a multi-layer steel gasket. There are differences in the torque specs between the Rev 2 fibre seal gasket and the Rev 3 multi-layer steel gasket. The big green book, which is the Toyota manual, really is the source of where to go. There's lots of misinformation online, so just check for your particular engine.
Our new OEM Toyota oil pump was a sealed unit, and we were unsure of it being packed out with anything to assist with the first startup in building pressure, so we decided not to risk it and opened it up. That way we could pack it out with petroleum jelly, which will burn up immediately upon startup It will prevent any metal components from starting dry and potentially causing failure.
Right, so we're nearing the final stages of completion for the refresh. We're not far off now. We've got the new oil pump and the water pump on. You would have seen us pack out the oil pump with the Vaseline for the initial startup. As Brad said also, whilst we're filming that, other petroleum jellies are available, if you can think of any. I don't know any. So that's on now, that's all good. Now we've got to put all the timing stuff back on, time it up again, rocker cover on. We're going to try and leave a lot of the stuff off just because I'm going to try and clean up and paint this engine a bit further on. The sump's staying off as well because that's a bit of a state, as we showed you earlier. I need to do a lot of work on that to clear it out and make it nice again. So that'll stay off and it'll be easier to move the engine around without it on anyway. So yeah, we're not far off now. Nearly there. With minimal issue, but now I've jinxed it.
Finally, the most finicky task of the day was our final step, timing up the engine. Here we're installing the new pulleys and hydraulic tensioner, but making sure not to remove the tensioner pin. I was told not to do this until the belt is in place to avoid catastrophic amounts of faff. You can follow the MR2 Sensei's sage wisdom from earlier in the video for the timing marks that we're lining up for, and that'll give you an indication of how to time up your very own 3S GTE at home. And to avoid causing any damage, we left this job to the one with the most experience. But after about an hour of adjusting teeth and wiggling belts, we had a refreshed 3S GTE motor nearly ready to run in our MR2.
Done.
Right, you join us, and at the end, timing up the engine took a while. As you can see, it's now dark. We've finally got it all timed up now. There's a few more bits to do on it still. A lot more cleaning to get it right, and I still want to paint up the engine. Need to get some exhaust and intake manifold gaskets for it, but it's looking pretty sweet. It doesn't look like it was a bad purchase. It should run. Obviously, time will tell. The day of running will be what it is. We'll see how it goes. But it's all timed up now. We've got all of the new timing gear in. We've cleaned it all out. The compression sounds nicer now. So if we're on a leak down, we'd probably do better now if we tested it again. We've luckily didn't do compression tests on it because we found some basically shrapnel with a sheared bolt in the timing. That would have gone horribly wrong and wrecked it. So lucky on that front that we didn't do that. But yeah, now next is just to do some more little bits on it, acquire some more parts, and hopefully get some space so we can swap this into the car. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to support the projects and the channel, you can become a YouTube member for the price of a cup of coffee a month. And if you enjoyed the series, like, subscribe, comment, let us know. If there's anything you see on this that you think, oh, they've done that wrong, let us know. Anything you think I should do, let us know. And I hope it's been a bit informative for you. This is completely new for me. I've never done something like this before. Obviously, I've done it with a lot of help, but I've learned loads today, and hopefully I can take this through into the swap and beyond, and it will be information that will forever remain and be super helpful. So yeah, thank you for joining us.